This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The mayor of Minneapolis slams President Trump as violence erupts over killing of a black man. The death toll in Nigeria's Sokoto state killings rise to 74. And the latest on the coronavirus pandemic as death toll in Africa passes 3,700. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Nigeria looking to diversify its economy through science and technology. And in sports, the 2020 Boston Marathon canceled for the first time in its 124-year history due to the COVID-19. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Let's begin in the United States, where the mayor of Minneapolis has addressed the public amid ongoing protests across the city. The demonstrations broke out after an African-American man died when a police officer knelt on his neck. The governor of Minnesota, called on the National Guard to intervene after looting and violence erupted. Mayor Jacob Frey condemned the destruction and called out Donald Trump over a tweet in which the U.S. president described Frey as a radical left mayor with a total lack of leadership.
Weakness is refusing to take responsibility for your own actions. Weakness is pointing your finger at somebody else during a time of crisis. Donald Trump knows nothing about the strength of Minneapolis. We are strong as hell. Is this a difficult time period? Yes, but you better be damn sure that we're gonna get through this.
Well, the death of an unarmed man adds to a long-standing anger over the police killings of black Americans. Dan Williams takes a look.
These are the images resonating across the United States. Protesters clashing with police in Minneapolis, buildings set on fire, shops and businesses looted. The anger among the city's residents comes after video emerged of African-American George Floyd gasping for breath on Monday, while a white policeman knelt on his neck.
I can't breathe. I can't move.
I've been waiting the whole time, man.
Floyd can be heard pleading with the officer that he could not breathe. He appears to lose consciousness after several minutes. He was pronounced dead at a local hospital. The arresting officer and 3 others on the scene were fired Tuesday. There was a standoff during the second night of demonstrations as protesters marched to the police station where the officers were thought to have worked. Police fired tear gas. Some of the protesters threw rocks. Amid the violence, 1 man was shot dead. Organisers had attempted to keep the protest peaceful.
Protests over the death of George Floyd are not limited to Minneapolis and have erupted in many cities across the country, including here in Chicago, where some local leaders say tensions are running high.
Anthony Bill is the alderman for Chicago's 9th Ward on the city's far south side.
What you're seeing now is people are really getting past the boiling point of police brutality. But if it not but for video now, we still wouldn't be talking about this today. Every phone has a camera, a video attached to it. Is why you're seeing people videoing this stuff now, bringing it to light. It's been happening forever.
The FBI is now involved, promising a robust criminal investigation. Floyd's family want the officers charged with murder, but urge protesters to be peaceful. Community leaders are calling for peace too, but this is a city on edge, angry and frustrated. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
Well, let's turn our attention to Nigeria, where the death toll from attacks on villages in Sokoto state has risen above 74. This as more bodies are recovered. Gunmen on motorcycles raided 5 villages close to the border with Niger.
Villages in northwest Nigeria say attackers persuaded people as they fled for their lives. Medics at the nearby hospital have been receiving dozens of corpses with gunshot wounds in the wake of the attacks.
They burnt our house, burnt our shops and killed our people. I don't have any other option but to leave the village.
The attack came as a surprise as security officials had recently visited the area to try to calm tensions. Northwestern Nigeria has been racked by years of violence from jihadists looking to establish a foothold in the region. Authorities have previously launched repeated military operations and local peace talks to try to end the violence. But so far, neither strategy has succeeded in halting the unrest. An estimated 8,000 people have been killed since 2011 and thousands displaced. The International Crisis Group now calls for closer cooperation between the security forces in Nigeria and Niger, or risk making the border a land bridge to Islamist fighters across the Sahel. Chamwono, CGTN.
And still on matters of security, the family of a Libyan people trafficker has killed 30 migrants in revenge for his death. The migrants killed the local trafficker in the desert town of Mizda. In a statement, Libya's UN-backed government has confirmed that 26 Bangladeshi and 4 African migrants were killed in the town of Mizda. 11 injured survivors were taken to a hospital in Zintan. The government will provide assistance to the survivors. It has issued an arrest warrant for the suspected attackers. Libya has long been a destination for migrants. It is also an important way station for people attempting to reach Europe across the Mediterranean. Well, Hong Kong has warned that the United States not intervene with the central government's proposed national security legislation for the region. It said the withdrawal of the financial hub's special trading status under the U.S. law could backfire on the economy. U.S. President Donald Trump is set to give a statement on the Chinese legislation on Friday. Meanwhile, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam issued a letter to the city's residents asking them to support the legislation. Our correspondent Zhu Dan is in Hong Kong with more.
Here in Hong Kong, some still have concern, believing it would undermine the one country, two systems policy and destroy Hong Kong's status as a global financial hub. Some hope the executive authority will work hard in explaining the relevant issues to address the concern of Hong Kong citizens and the international community about the national security law. While supporters say the continuing violent activities in Hong Kong means the national security law is necessary and in urgent need. No other country can tolerate terrorist-type activities on its soil. Granville Cross, Hong Kong's former prosecutor who is living for Hong Kong for 40 years, said national security is of such importance that it is invariably legislated for by national parliaments. It was therefore remarkable that when the National People's Congress enacted the Basic Law in 1990, it authorized the future Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to enact laws on its own prohibiting treason, secession, sedition, and subversion against the central government in Article 23. This was a huge display of faith in Hong Kong, he said. Granville also said it is not fair to accuse the central government of failing to comply with the basic law or undermine the one country, two systems principle when Hong Kong itself has not fulfilled its obligations in the last 23 years.
Meanwhile, a coalition of Western countries has condemned China's plan to impose the new security law. The United States, along with Australia, Canada, and the UK, say it's direct violation of its international commitments. CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King has more on this. Let's take a look.
Even before the ink was dry on the new Hong Kong security legislation, the US reacted forcefully, at least with its words. The US State Department also issued a joint statement along with its allies, Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom. In part, it reads, "We are also extremely concerned that this action would exacerbate the existing deep divisions in Hong Kong society." But beyond words, actions against Hong Kong haven't yet been announced. The US president says he will hold a press conference addressing China issues on Friday.
We'll be announcing what we're doing tomorrow with respect to China, and we are not happy with China. We are not happy with what's happened. All over the world, people are suffering. 186 countries. All over the world, they're suffering. We're not happy.
Initial options being considered include long-arm jurisdiction financial sanctions and travel bans against individual Hong Kong and mainland officials. Curbs on travel, and potentially the most problematic could be ending Hong Kong's special trading status. That could lead to restrictions on exports from Hong Kong, one of China's special administrative regions exempt from tariffs. The financial centre in Hong Kong could also get squeezed in the US trade war with the mainland. US companies, global investors and some US allies are pushing back on such moves, saying it would harm Western companies and hurt Hong Kong citizens. Then there's the question of whether the US will act unilaterally or in concert with allies. What is clear is that now Hong Kong is firmly part of the US pressure campaign against China. We of course have the trade war, the tech war, finger pointing over COVID-19, actions against China in Xinjiang, more cooperation with the region of Taiwan, and now Hong Kong as well. China defends the legislation, saying it is part of national sovereignty and should not concern outsiders. But that has never stopped the US before. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Well, Beijing says it will adopt countermeasures if external forces interfere in Hong Kong's affairs. A foreign ministry spokesperson had this warning for Washington and its allies.
The decision of the National People's Congress of China to establish and improve the legal system and enforcement mechanism for the maintenance of national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is entirely China's internal affairs. No foreign country has the right to interfere. We will take the necessary countermeasures to resolutely oppose the wrong actions of external forces interfering in Hong Kong affairs. Hong Kong is an important area for the investment and operations of American industry and commerce. Washington has important interests in Hong Kong. We advise that the US recognize the situation and stop interfering in Hong Kong affairs and China's internal affairs. If the US insists on harming China's interests, China will take the necessary measures to resolutely fight back.
Meanwhile, African leaders are following closely the developments for Hong Kong. In Zimbabwe, the Minister of Information says Hong Kong is an inalienable part of Chinese territory, and China's national security legislation will be conducive to national unity and development.
Yes, I've been following up what has been happening in Hong Kong, and I think this is again interventions coming from the Western countries who always want to see people divided. We are very much for the one China policy, and that is what we support as a country. And we know the suffering when people are divided. What the People's Republic of China has been doing, its policy on Hong Kong, has brought the Chinese people together as one. And that has brought the developments, the economic developments that we have seen happening in that country. So yes, I have been following, and that really is a disgrace. It should be discouraged, and I'm happy the Chinese government is working very hard to make sure that they put laws which will certainly make sure that is dealt with. I think the People's Republic of China is a sovereign state. It knows exactly what is good for its people. It knows exactly what will bring the people together. It knows exactly what will make the economy tick. We know that there's been a lot of development happening in China, and certainly this comes with peace and unity. And unity, where there's unity, where there's peace, there's certainly development. And so we support that law. And we only hope that these interventions coming, foreign intervention, doesn't continue to happen, because all what it does, it actually brings disunity, it brings discord in a country, and that affects the rate of development which China is moving it.
And following the two sessions held in China, South Africa says the Asian country will further open its economy to the outside world and strengthen multilateral cooperation globally. CGTN caught up with the provincial chairperson for the ruling ANC party in the Western Cape, and here's more on what he had to say.
Especially at the time where you find your European and American countries are very much squeezed economically by this. So we are more especially looking towards China as the developing world, and also in particular as Africa and as South Africa for cooperation and trade relations. So to us, it comes at a very good time, and especially to emphasize the multilateralism, both in politics and economy throughout the world global, that this is the only thing that can help us to defeat this virus.
Keep it right here on Africa Live. We've got more news coming your way after the break. Here's a look at what's ahead. Burundi opposition files petition at Constitutional Court challenging presidential election results. And a chimpanzee sanctuary in Uganda submerged as Lake Victoria swells.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. The coronavirus cases across the world now surpass 5.9 million with 362,000 deaths. Nearly 2.6 million people have recovered from the virus. Africa has reported over 129,000 COVID-19 cases. The continent's death toll stands at around 3,700. The Africa CDC is reporting over 53,000 confirmed recoveries. Let's take a closer look at the figures across the continent. Northern Africa has over 38,000 COVID-19 infections. Egypt is the hardest hit country in the region with over 19,000 cases. According to Egypt's medical union, at least 19 doctors have died and 350 are infected with the virus. The union has warned that the health system could completely collapse if the government doesn't do more to protect healthcare workers. Many countries in West Africa have started to ease the restrictions they had placed to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Nigeria and Ghana have the highest number of cases in that region. They pass over 7,000. Now, Ghana is expected to hold general elections in December. The Electoral Commission says the process to register new voters will begin June and last for 40 days. Moving to East Africa, Sudan continues to have the highest number of confirmed cases in the region. The country has over 4,000 cases. Somalia and Kenya have each recorded over 1,600 infections. Cameroon continues to report the highest number of cases in Central Africa. The country has reported over 5,000 cases. The Central African country is among those that have launched massive community door-to-door campaigns to screen people and identify potential cases for testing. Then finally, Southern Africa. South Africa has recorded more than 27,000 cases. The country has eased some lockdown restrictions as they manage to flatten the curve of infections. On June the 1st, South Africa will move to level 3 of their lockdown, which means the ban on the sale of alcohol will be lifted. Schools are also expected to reopen and religious gatherings will be permitted under preventative measures. And to Sudan now, where at least 3 detained senior officials in the former regime of Bashir have tested positive for COVID-19 in prison. The country is also facing a myriad of challenges as the number of COVID-19 cases are on the increase.
Rising COVID-19 infections and attacks on healthcare workers and facilities are straining Sudan's healthcare system. The country has reported more than 4,000 COVID-19 cases, with the death toll close to 200. At least 3 jailed senior members of the ousted administration of former Sudanese leader Omar al-Bashir have also tested positive for the virus. They include Ali Osman Taha, a former vice president, Abdel Rahim Mohamed Hussein, a former defense minister, and Ahmed Haroun, a former aide to Omar al-Bashir. Both Hussein and Haroun are wanted by the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes against humanity in Darfur. Sudan's prosecution service says all 3 are under health quarantine in hospitals in Khartoum. In March, 4,000 prisoners were released as a precaution against the spread of the disease in jails. Decades of sanctions have brought the country's health system to its knees. Early this month, Health Minister Akram Al-Tom said the country faced a severe shortage of life-saving drugs and protective clothing for medical staff in hospitals and screening centers. At least 10% of those infected are health workers. Concerns have also been raised that contacts of suspected cases are declining to provide adequate information, making it difficult to control the spread of the virus. Attacks on healthcare facilities and workers in the past 2 months have prompted the Prime Minister's office to announce the creation of a police unit to protect health facilities. Following the outbreak of the virus, the government declared a public health emergency and partial closures of all airports and borders. Public gatherings and events have been banned and a dusk-to-dawn curfew in force since March 24th. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Ethiopia has begun repatriating stranded citizens working abroad in Lebanon. Migrants are returning following an unprecedented economic crisis in Lebanon, along with the coronavirus pandemic. The first group of 335 has arrived back from Beirut. More are expected to travel over the weekend. Many have registered to go home, but expensive tickets and quarantine fees have delayed trips. Migrant workers are among the most vulnerable groups affected by recent events in Lebanon. Over 250,000 are employed in the country, and rights groups say the conditions migrants live in are exploitative, citing low incomes, long working hours, and little to no protection. On top of that, Lebanon's currency crunch means employers can no longer pay in dollars, and with the value of the local currency tumbling, some workers have lost 60% of their earnings. Others reported not being paid at all, while many have lost their jobs altogether.
I have been working more than 4 years in Beirut, and we spent good and bad times there. We are returning because of the country's economic crisis. There are no jobs or money, so we went from our country to get money and for a better life. But the country's economy slowly collapsed, and there are no dollars, no payment, and they cannot be able to afford to pay us in dollars.
Unless they're in a very vulnerable situation, they're not going to be repatriated at this point. But we would work with the actual hosting government, plus the international community, as well as our government would work on just assisting them where they are. Apart from that, today we have received about 335 from Beirut. There will be some more, in total of 649.
The African Union says the continent has not yet tested even 1% of its population for COVID-19. Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says so far at least 2 million tests have been carried out across different countries. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
The Africa CDC says the continent's sharp increase in confirmed coronavirus cases in recent weeks is also a result of increased testing. The agency's director attributes the improvement in testing capacity to a program launched in March by the African Union.
When we launched the initiative, we told you that Africa CDC was going to distribute over 1 million tests. I'm very pleased today to say that by the end of this week, we would have distributed 2.5 million tests. That means our own tests, the 1 million and more tests from Senegal, together with those that we obtained from the Jack Ma Foundation there.
But that is still 7 times less than is being carried out in places like the United States.
As a continent of 1.2 billion people, if our goal is to test 1% of our population, it means we have to test 12 million or to conduct 12 million tests. So as I said, we are close to 2 million, which means we still have a gap of 10 million.
And as countries begin to ease up their lockdowns in a bid to save their economies, the Africa CDC says they must be cautious not to reverse gains made so far. The Africa CDC is setting up guidelines that will guide countries in easing up their stringent measures that will ensure that both lives and livelihoods are equally saved. It says investment in public health must be priority.
We should always remember that the cause of our economic challenges on a continent that was projected to have a positive growth this year, is because of the virus. So unless and until we beat the virus, we'll continue to be challenged with the economy. So I mean, let that be very, very clear.
All 54 African countries have registered COVID-19 cases, with South Africa and Egypt among the worst hit. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Nearly 97% of private clinics in Tunisia are no longer able to cover their operating costs due to the coronavirus crisis, and that's according to a study by the Tunisia Health Alliance. The alliance is urging the government to support private clinics to help maintain quality health care. Adnan Shawashi reports.
Ghazi Dargouth is the head of the Tunisia Health Alliance. He has conducted this study on the social, economic and financial impact of the crisis on the health subsectors. Dargouth warns that the situation of the private healthcare sector is alarming.
Private clinics in Tunisia have lost around 80% in turnover. It's worth mentioning that 50% of patients come from abroad. The borders have been closed as part of the prevention and safety measures, and people are unable to come for medical treatment.
The expert insists that the Ministry of Health should put in place an emergency plan that will help alleviate the financial burden on clinics during and in the aftermath of the coronavirus crisis.
Even Tunisian patients are afraid to go to clinics because they fear coronavirus infections. That's how even ordinary surgeries are cancelled or postponed, while clinics have maintained their full medical, paramedical, technical and administrative staff. Operating costs are too high.
Dr. Shrif is a former health minister in Tunisia who now represents many health professionals in the private sector. The surgeon asserts that the epidemiological situation has improved in the North African state.
Tunisia can reopen its borders to Algerian and Libyan patients, as well as Europeans for health tourism. Foreign partners gave full confidence in Tunisian doctors and clinics. The COVID-19 crisis management was successful. We must respond before clinics are forced to shut down.
There are over 100 private clinics with 600 beds across Tunisia. The sector is considered as the second strategic line of care if public hospitals are overwhelmed. According to the Tunisia Health Alliance, only 2.5% of the clinics will manage to pay their employees' salaries until August. In fact, around $3 million in monthly payroll will evaporate. More than 9,000 jobs are threatened out of the 17,000 highly skilled jobs in this sector. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
And here's a recap of our top stories at this hour. The mayor of Minneapolis has called out President Donald Trump over a tweet in which the U.S. president described him as a radical left mayor with a total lack of leadership. This comes amid ongoing protests across the city. The demonstrations broke out after an African-American man died when a police officer knelt on his neck. The death toll from attacks on villages in Nigeria's Sokoto state has risen above 74 as more bodies are recovered. Gunmen on motorcycles raided 5 villages close to the border with Niger. And in Somalia, 7 health workers and a civilian have been killed on the outskirts of Mogadishu. The incident happened in Galule village in the Bala district. The health workers were kidnapped by masked men in military uniforms on Wednesday. They were taken from a health center run by the Zamzam Foundation, which is involved in the education and peace building in Somalia. And in Burundi, the main opposition party has gone to court to contest the presidential election results. It alleges that it was riddled with fraud and irregularities. The Electoral Commission declared the ruling party candidate Evariste Ndayishimiye the winner with 68.72% of the votes. And that is a wrap of some of the top stories making headlines this hour. Let's turn to Addis Ababa, where the African Union Commission has welcomed a consignment of medical supplies from China. The deputy chair of the AUC said the donation is a clear testimony of growing ties between China and Africa. Here's CGTN's Cyril Nta with the details.
The medical aid from the Chinese mission to the African Union Commission was delivered in an event held at the headquarters in Addis Ababa. Chinese ambassador to the African Union, Liu Yushi, said only international cooperation can provide the answer for the current COVID-19 related challenge.
International cooperation is the best powerful weapon to defeat the pandemic. The only way forward is our international cooperation. This cooperation between China and Africa, I believe, will definitely help us move faster, overcome this challenge and play a bigger role through this type of immediate cooperation between China and Africa.
After receiving the donation, which includes face masks, gloves and others which are used for coronavirus prevention, the deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission, Kwesi Kwate, said Africa appreciates China's continued support. He said the continent must also strengthen its public health institutions now more than any other time.
Thank the government and people of China for their continued support for Africa. The pandemic tells us that you can never tell what should happen in the future. So we have to strengthen our public health systems. We have to have a system where people are in solidarity with each other, as members of a family, as nations, as countries, as continents.
The African Union Commission and the Chinese mission to the African Union have both played a key role of coordinating the COVID-19 pandemic combat strategy between Africa and China. This effective engagement has been expressed since the outbreak through repetitive medical aids, experience sharing, and more. Group Data CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And Burundi's main opposition party has gone to the Constitutional Court to contest the presidential election results. It alleges that it was riddled with fraud and irregularities. The Electoral Commission declared the ruling party candidate Evariste Ndayishimiye the winner with 68.72% of the votes casted. It announced opposition leader Agathon Rwasa of the National Freedom Council second with around 24%. Burundi's Catholic Church has backed claims that there was massive fraud during the polls held on the 20th of May, but a joint statement issued by Western diplomats has made no reference to any irregularities. The court in Burundi has until June the 5th to make its decision. If it rejects the opposition's legal efforts, Ndayishimiye will be inaugurated in August for a 7-year mandate. He will take over President Pierre Nkurunziza, who has been in office for 15 years.
If the court is not in favor of our appeal or application, then we will try to take our case to the East African Court based in Arusha. We have had cases where deceased people have been mentioned as having voted because their voter cards were printed and distributed to people who went to vote in their place.
And flooding on the shores of Lake Victoria is continuing to displace residents and affect hundreds of livelihoods. In Uganda, a chimpanzee sanctuary located on Lake Victoria has flooded, threatening revenue needed for running the shelter. TGTN's Isabel Nakiria reports.
High tides on Lake Victoria have washed away shorelines on Ngamba Island. The beaches on this island, home to a chimpanzee and bird sanctuary, are no more. Accommodation for visitors is flooded, shutting out tourists that are a main source of revenue.
You can always tell where the lake has been from the type of soil, the sand and watermarks that are left on rocks. Now it's in areas where it has not been before. And it is affecting especially many of our structures, and we're also afraid that our chimpanzee sleeping area, the holding facility where they spend the night, will also get affected because water is seeping from underneath the ground.
The 100-acre island is covered by mostly a forest where the chimpanzees nest. Authorities warn the extent of damage to the facility could affect the health of the chimps.
The animals get sick and we have to take them into these vet clinics, isolate them. The fence every day has to be on and has to be functional because the chimps spend the day in the forest. So if at all the fence is under threat from the water levels, if at all it collapses, then we may get escapes.
Animal caretakers here say at least 20% of the island has been submerged, and there is fear that the water level could continue rising, putting the lives of the 50 chimpanzees that have called this home for years at risk. The sanctuary shut its doors to tourists following the outbreak of COVID-19. But the rising water due to persistent rains has worsened the crisis on the island. The sanctuary is now struggling to provide proper nutrition to the chimps.
We cannot open the sanctuary if the risk is still there. So as long as the risk exists and until we find a way to manage the risk, either through vaccination or otherwise, we have to keep the sanctuary closed. So that means that for an extended period, we're not going to be having any revenue.
In the meantime, the center is placing barricades along the shorelines to prevent the rising water level from reaching higher ground. But this is just a temporary measure. There are no plans yet to move the animals, and releasing them back to the wild isn't an option. Many of the chimpanzees here are victims of illegal wildlife trade and lack the proper skills to survive on their own. For now, the sanctuary is depending on donations as it rethinks long-term plans of rebuilding the sanctuary. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Ngamba Island on Lake Victoria.
And the news continues on Africa Live. We've got your business news coming up next. Here's a look at the headlines. Cape Town's popular tidal pools get a much-needed eco-friendly scrub. And could this be Nigeria's answer to diversifying its economy? Find out after this short break. Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for being with us. Severe shortages of menstrual hygiene products and lack of access to basic information about menstrual hygiene management are leaving girls and women worldwide struggling to manage their periods during COVID-19 lockdowns. The findings have emerged from a survey carried out by child rights and humanitarian organization Plan International in 24 countries. And as the world marks World Menstrual Health Awareness Week, stakeholders are urging governments to act with urgency to provide solutions.
More than half of the women in the world are of reproductive age, but many lack access to menstrual hygiene products or sanitation facilities, and the COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating the issue. In order to establish the impact of the pandemic on menstrual health and services, child rights organization Plan International conducted a survey on its professionals. The online survey attracted 61 responses from professionals working in 24 countries and highlighted particular areas of concern. The number one issue reported was product shortages, as global supply chains have been disrupted and some markets remain closed. Restrictions on movement have also made sourcing of goods more challenging. When sanitary products are hard to obtain, individuals may be forced to use unhygienic alternatives that can increase their risk of infections. Two-thirds, 68% of the professionals surveyed identified a lack of access to clean water to wash, toilets with doors for privacy, and a lack of means to dispose of used products as barriers to managing menstrual hygiene in a private, safe, and dignified manner. Girls and stakeholders have reported an increase in the price of sanitary products. While the increase in prices can be attributed in part to limited supplies of sanitary products, survey participants also suggest that in some areas prices have been opportunistically inflated. With the pandemic significantly affecting household incomes, it is harder now for people, including adolescent girls, to afford sanitary products. Access to clean and reliable water is essential for managing menstruation safely and hygienically. With COVID-19 intensifying household water needs in water-scarce environments and with lockdowns reducing access to water, women and girls may not prioritize water for their menstruation needs. Similarly, they may be unable to access a toilet that is in another household or is shared with others due to the risks of contracting COVID-19. Other concerns raised include lack of access to information and increased stigma and harmful cultural practices. With this in mind, the organization has urged governments to invest in inclusive water, sanitation and hygiene services and facilities and public health infrastructure. These measures, they emphasize, will aid in preventing the spread of COVID-19 as well as in promoting the health and dignity of women and adolescent girls during and after the pandemic. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
Let's shift our focus to South Africa, where tidal pools around Cape Town's peninsula have long been popular swimming spots for both locals and tourists. The pools are home to fish, crabs, and shrimps, but cleaning them up in an environmentally friendly manner has been a challenge for city authorities. As CGTN's Travis Andrews now reports, that's about to change.
Tidal pools are seen as a great way to enjoy the sea and for spotting small types of marine life, as well as enjoying snorkeling. But to clean these pools, Cape Town city authorities haven't used the best means at their disposal. It's something they realized through a campaign spearheaded by a local freediver and naturalist.
So the draining was very, very destructive. And then they would also scrape all the life off the sides of the walls. So a lot of the life is plant life. I mean, there are a lot of smaller animals living in there, but as we understand about ecosystems, every part of the ecosystem, any destruction to any part of the ecosystem will have a knock-on effect throughout the whole system.
Through the Cape Town Tidal Pools initiative, the city will soon begin employing more environmentally friendly methods of cleaning the tidal pools. This is expected to conserve marine life. To save resources, the city previously used many chemicals, which were eventually flushed out to sea.
Some of the pools are 100 years old, so the pools have been around for a really long time, and they've always just been cleaned in a way that aided people not to slip in the pools. And I think there was a lot more awareness on the people's use of the pools as structural facilities rather than as like from an environmental perspective.
However, cleaners will now use a special high-powered hose to blast the algae off the walls with seawater, which is far less destructive to the pools and the surrounding reefs. The initiative underscores the important and inherent linkages between the ocean and tidal pools, as well as the important role each and every person can play in trying to keep these microcosms of biodiversity healthy and in good shape.
And the pools are already really well used.
used. Dalebrook Tidal Pool is used by the Shark Centre. Regulars in the tidal pools, and then St. James Tidal Pool is also a favourite with learning to snorkel campaigns that are run by Waves for Change, and then also the beach car, which is fantastic because kids can put on a mask and they're coming from all over the place and they can have a look underwater. Often the first time they've actually seen a fish swimming around, so it's really, really cool.
For now, the city of Cape Town has pledged to ensure that all tidal pools will be cleaned in an environmentally friendly way, so that locals and visitors may be able to enjoy these wonders of nature for generations to come. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, for years now, Nigeria has tried to diversify its oil-dependent economy with varying degrees of success. One viable option may lie in the science and technology sector. Although still largely untapped, young talents are rising to bridge the tech gap in the West African oil producer. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports.
The unveiling of the Made in Nigeria electric car in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. The event showcases budding innovators like Mark Zen. Mark has never been to school, but he built this eco-friendly vehicle that runs fully on solar batteries. It's one of his many innovations.
2012.
I have built quite a number of things. The first thing I ever constructed in 2012 was a tricycle. I have constructed an oven for baking. There is also a grinding machine used for milling grind maize. Truthfully, there is almost nothing I cannot construct except if I don't set sight on it. Anywhere it is brought from, even if it is the picture I see, so long as you tell me it is what you want, I'll do it for you.
The science and technology sector contributed nearly 14% to the national GDP in the second quarter of 2019. But the sector remains grossly underfinanced. Young innovators believe that Nigeria has the potential to birth great innovations with the right support.
The financial problem was the major concern. When we started, people did not believe that it can be possible. But when that is succeeded, everybody now have that confidence that in Nigeria we can do something that was meaningful.
I strongly believe that if Nigerian government can be able to put more and go out there with the Ministry of Science and Technology and discover the talent that we have out there, the whole world will be amazed.
Nigeria has been mulling plans to diversify its economy from relying on oil. This is more so as the consistent plunge in the global oil prices continues to threaten the already fragile economy. Science and technology remains one of the country's most undertapped sectors. But with some of the success stories being recorded, many are hoping the government and relevant institutions will support local innovations. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Nyungu means steaming in Swahili. It is a traditional treatment by boiling a mixture of different herbs, for example, neem tree leaves, ginger, lemons, and so on. With high temperature steam and vapor inhalation, it is believed that can kill organisms that cause diseases in breathing systems inside the human body. During the outbreak of COVID-19, Tanzania's President John Pombe Magufuli encouraged the Tanzanian people to practice it frequently in order to fight against the pandemic. And we're not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a look at the headlines. In sports, the 2020 Boston Marathon canceled for the first time in its 124-year history due to COVID-19.
How would you create your legend?